Oh, okay, excellent. So welcome to the October Peace Pulse. We are delighted to have a phenomenal speaker with us today, Cindy Watson from Canada. And this is just my simple introduction. We did post her intro on our Facebook page and in our newsletter. And Cindy is many things, including a civil rights attorney. She is successful in everything she touches. She definitely believes in women empowerment. And her topic to us, and she's really one of the best coaches, global coaches, I would say, for women. So she's an author, she's a TEDx Ocala speaker. She has really spoken in many different venues and locations, is doing phenomenal work. It's almost like she's just starting. So this is the beginning of the new Cindy Watson in her career. We're so pleased to have you here with us, Cindy. And please take it away. I'm going to come off camera and we'll be listening. I'm going to actually pin you so that way the screen has yourself. So let me do that. So where is the pin?
That's always dangerous with the big close-up.
There you go. You are recording. We're excited to learn from you today. Thank you for being with us, Cindy.
Oh, well, thank you for the intro. And it's super great to be here. There's a part of me that wishes we were in person. Zoom is super convenient, but I definitely would love to feel the energy from this powerful group of very powerhouse women. I was going to do a fancy PowerPoint, but I decided that I'd prefer the personal connection in the limited time that we have to share here today. And especially because I'm going to be speaking in part about connection. It's an important part of what I call the art of feminine negotiation. And also, let me just take a second to congratulate all of you for the important work that you do. I mean, the more I read about Ollin and your mission, the more inspired and excited I was for this opportunity to share this space with you. And I am definitely going to join as an ambassador in your program. I love everything about what you guys do. And as the more I was reading, I've got to say, I feel really connected given the work that we all do. From your peace pledge, where you guys recognize that, to make peace a part of everyday life. You don't hear that often when people talk about peace. Everybody has these grand visions and we ignore starting with that sort of making peace with ourselves and making part of our life. And from that to your declaration of peace. And I took some time to explore some of your personal definitions of peace in your profiles. And I loved it. It so resonated with me, that before we can bring peace on the outside, we need to start on the inside. The idea about letting go of ego and peace in our hearts, and that peace can be big and small. These are all concepts that I loved and really connected with, deeply resonated with me, because I've been on a mission to redefine conflict, to redefine success and reframe power, and in particular, reframing negotiation. And when I say that, a lot of you may be like, negotiation. And I'm sure some of your people thought, I'm not sure I want that. My clients are often saying to me, why do you call what you do negotiation training or programs? Like it is that, but it's so much more. And I choose to focus on negotiation because I came to discover that all of life is a negotiation. And I think we don't recognize that often enough. At the macro and, at the micro and the macro level, we negotiate every day in a myriad of ways. Our first and most important negotiation is with ourselves, right? I mean, negotiating our own mindset every day, hundreds of moments in the day. And then you go from negotiating our own mindsets to negotiating our relationships with our kids, our intimate partners, service providers, multi-million-dollar transactions, or to negotiating on the global scene, whether it's peace in the Middle East or the Russia-Ukraine. The principles are the same, right? And ironically, most of my clients, I think, come to me for the professional advice, right? How to up-level their ability to get more professionally. And we definitely do that and work on it. But I always find it interesting, and I think they find it even more interesting, that they're surprised at the profound impact that it has on their personal relationships and negotiating their best life. So my reframe has focused on leaning into the feminine, and after doing a lot of research and work on this mission of mine, I have come to believe more and more that the solution starts with that simple shift. And in 2020, thanks to your illustrious Manal and the fabulous work she does with TEDx Ocala, I did a TEDx talk, and my topic was Rise of the Feminine Voice as the Key to Our Future. And the idea at the time was that the world is out of balance because we've lost touch with our feminine. And I recognize that's not a new concept, but it was interesting to me that it was being treated as so novel and particularly surprising given that the Dalai Lama has been talking about this for at least a decade and a half. And again, another point of connection, I saw you guys have that quote of the Dalai Lama on your website, and I'm just going to share it for a sec. To promote greater compassion, we must pay special attention to the role of women. The time has come for women to take more active roles in all domains of human society. In an age in which education and the capacities of the mind, not physical strength, define leadership, this could help create a more equitable and compassionate society. And I dug to see when that quote was first introduced by the Dalai Lama. And he has been saying this every year in multiple talks since at least 2007. So I'm like, it only took a decade and a half and a global pandemic for the message to actually get received, I think. And for me, I will say probably it's been 5 years at least since I've been really vociferously sharing this message. And, a mere 2 years after my TEDx, I believe COVID has actually finally opened the world to a new way of thinking, a new way of being. I think it was such a shock to people's systems that it forced people to reevaluate their lives and how we were living them. So Ollin, and your message, I believe, is particularly timely now. And that's why I'm super excited to be here and share this today and hopefully inspire you, because I invite you to take advantage of this opportunity, this window we have. And Ollin, as you know, means to move and act now with all your heart. And I believe the time is now. There is a new appreciation for the value of feminine energy in business, in politics, and beyond. I know personally, I'm being asked to speak now at business schools, at law symposiums. I was asked to speak a few weeks ago in Greece on feminine wisdom. I mean, you wouldn't have seen that happening a decade ago. And people are suggesting that the countries with female leaders fared better during COVID. I never get into the muck about whether that's true or not, because I don't know that that matters as much as it does matter that at the very least, the value of feminine stock went up. Feminine traits, I think, are being recognized as key leadership skills for the first time in a really long time. So let's dig in. How can we use feminine energy to save the world, to foster peace personally, professionally, and globally? And I should have said right at the beginning, so let me say now, when I speak of feminine, I'm not talking about gender. There's no one way to be a woman or a man or any of the spaces in between. So I definitely always like to start by recognizing that we all have masculine and feminine energy. The problem, though, is that for too long, I believe we have been undervaluing our feminine, men and women. And let me use myself as an example. I grew up in a low rental apartment complex in a tough neighborhood. And my dad worked in a factory, but he always taught my sister and I that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. So from a really young age, I wanted to make a difference in the world. Not surprising, I was drawn to law. I've been practicing social justice law for over 30 years. I'm dating myself here now. But in law school, I took a negotiation course. And I probably wouldn't have taken it had I known that we were effectively negotiating for our marks, right? Because we were broken off into pairs over the course of the year and given a simulated exercise, and whoever got the best negotiated settlement got the best mark, and then the marks were prorated down from there. So you can imagine the pressure in a highly competitive law school. And I won virtually every simulated exercise that year. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm only sharing that because of the epiphany that came later. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but much later, when I had my epiphany, I recognized that in those negotiations, even though the stakes were high, or at least for me at the time, I wasn't negotiating from a competitive place of more, masculine energy. I came to every one of those negotiations saying, okay, we've only got 50 minutes. What do you need? Tell me, what can I do for you? How can I serve you? There's got to be a great solution here for us. So let's try and find that. I was building rapport. I was bringing empathy to the table. I was building trust, being flexible as you had to be. We only had 50 minutes to come up with a solution, and trusting my intuition. Dare I say I was in my natural feminine energy. But then I started the practice of law. And, this was back in the 80s. So I was typically the only woman in the room, especially my labor law practice, doing social justice work. It was almost always all men. And I started looking around, this fresh-faced 20-something out of law school. And I'm like, geesh, I think if I'm going to be taken seriously here, if I'm going to succeed, I need to get scrappier, right? I mean, how many of us do that in the corporate world or otherwise believe we got to get tougher if we're going to succeed? And so I did. And I was celebrated for it. You know, my clients called me the Barracuda. They meant it as a compliment. And I confess, I wore it like a badge of honor. I'm now embarrassed, but I wore that like a badge of honor for many years. But as I'm sure some of you have experienced, if you've believed that's the way to succeed, there is a high price to pay for that. A high price for me personally. I did not like who I was becoming, how it affected my personal relationships. You know, when I'm having a simple conversation, I thought with my son, and he's like getting so upset. He's like, for God's sake, Mom, does every discussion with you have to be an argument that you win? It kind of took my breath away. And I thought, I don't like this person I'm becoming, but also a high price for others, right? You know, if a hotel room didn't have the room I'd reserved, look out, hide your kids, you know? I mean, it was that kind of fight or flight response, but also I would say a high price for the world. Now, you may be thinking, oh, isn't that a little dramatic, Cindy? You know, the world is out of balance because you lost your feminine. No, I'm not saying that, but it wasn't just me, right? I wasn't alone. The world is out of balance. We're seeing chaos. We're seeing such conflict. And I believe it's because the feminine and masculine energy has become so out of balance. So I started looking into how did that happen? You know, it's not really, our feminine voice has been discounted for generations. I think we live in the myth that it's a man's world. I've been guilty of saying that. We often say it, we often hear it. And we definitely define success more and more. Even if you look at the TV shows we watch and the corporate, all of the modeling we get, have been increasingly defining success based on a masculine model, a very competitive model. Everything is win or lose. You get ahead at all costs. You take power at all costs. And as a result of that, when we define success for so long on those terms, both men and women start to stifle their feminine in favor of that more competitive model. When we start to see our feminine as a liability. And again, I won't put you on the spot to ask how many of you have been guilty or had that thought, but I invite you to think about it. And when we start seeing our feminine as a liability, it tips the scales. I was guilty, I confess. I absolutely had bought into the myth that toughness carries the day. And I think it's the insidious nature of those unconscious gender biases that are so powerful and dangerous. And it's no wonder that we bought into it. We all carry deeply conditioned gender biases. And I'm not just talking about bias of men against women, but also women against women and even against ourselves. You know, I share this in my TEDx. I often share this because the study shocked me that in study after study of young women writing their SAT exams, where half the control group were asked to identify their gender in advance of the test, just simply check off whether you're male or female. Consistently, those young women who were asked to check off their gender performed more poorly. Like, that's kind of mind-blowing, right? I mean, think about the profound internal gender bias that's at play, where simply bringing our femaleness to our attention makes us underperform. And I'm sure you've heard the other the studies on, best candidates for a job where people are given, unbeknownst to them, identical resumes. And both male and female participants consistently choose the male for the job based on identical resumes. I mean, this unconscious gender bias runs deep. Women are still talked over and interrupted more. So as people reject their feminine strengths in favor of a masculine, believing that that's the only way to succeed, we continue to tip that balance. So what's the impact of that? I mean, we're seeing certainly now suicide rates are at all-time highs. Depression and anxiety across all ages and cultures are at all-time highs. We're seeing the effects of climate change. We were just talking about the hurricanes, as we, destroy the environment. Political polarization is, at unprecedented levels in the US. You are certainly feeling that. The chaos of COVID, global conflict. And it's interesting to me because we have, with technology, more communication tools, and yet we have less connection. We have more resources, and yet I think most people, if you ask them and they're being open and raw and vulnerable, we feel more helpless. So enough doom and gloom. What do we do? I mean, you've come here for some solutions, not to talk more about the problems. So let's get to that. How do we take control of our lives when we have so little control over much of what happens around us? And I invite you all to just Remind yourself when things seem chaotic that we may not be able to control what happens, but we can control how we choose to react, how we choose to show up, and how we choose to negotiate this thing called life, personally, professionally, and globally. And make no mistake, it is a negotiation. It is a choice. So even though I know it probably causes some people to not show up when they hear I'm talking about negotiation, I still continue to use that language because I am determined to reframe how we look at negotiation and how we do it. And as I researched and dug deep, I asked myself, all right, if negotiation is a big part of the solution, what if everything we thought we knew about negotiation was wrong or counterproductive? And sure enough, when I examine those elements that make the most effective negotiators, it comes down to 6 elements. And I shared this in the TED Talk: assertiveness, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust. So just think RFIT. It's a simple mnemonic. You are fit to be a great negotiator, AREFIT. So let's park assertiveness for a moment. If you look at the other 5 of those 6 traits that mark the best negotiators, historically and today still, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust, the vast majority of people, when questioned, and they've actually done surveys on this, will label those as feminine traits or the softer skills, feminine skills. 5 out of 6. And even for assertiveness, which is the 1 out of 6 that people typically would consider masculine, I actually believe that's based on a misconception. We often conflate assertive with aggressive. They're not the same thing. Assertiveness just means coming from a place of confidence. That confidence comes from knowledge, and knowledge comes from preparation. It's really that simple. So the key is adopting feminine traits or skill sets. And yet our entire systems, our economic systems, our business systems, our political systems, even our educational systems, our legal systems are all operating on predominantly masculine competitive models. Now, my first whisper of what I've come to call the art of feminine negotiation was probably in that law school negotiation course. I didn't know it at the time. And my next whisper came when my daughter, our firstborn, was diagnosed with a serious heart defect. And I've shared the long version of this. I'll give you a very short, abbreviated version. She was diagnosed at 2 months and needed open heart surgery. And we spent 3 months in critical care, as everything that could go wrong seemed to. And if you'd ever thought there was a time that I would have brought that barracuda to the table, it would have been then, right? When we're literally fighting for her life every day. And yet I didn't. I employed the RFIT model, that assertiveness, rapport building, empathy, flexibility, intuition, and trust, before I'd even developed the concept. Every day in that hospital, operating again purely on what I would call feminine strength and intuition, I was building rapport with the nurses, the doctors, the administrators. I was bringing empathy to the table, commiserating with them about budget cuts, etc. I had to stay flexible because the ground was constantly shifting under our feet from moment to moment as Jade's reactions were all over the map. I had to tap into my intuition. And heck, medical terminology I had never heard of. I was having to absorb it and channel it to be able to advocate for my daughter, and building trust with myself, with my husband, with all of the players. And was I assertive? You bet. When my tentative input at the beginning was routinely rejected, only to turn out to be correct, I started to really lean in and trust that intuition, to use my voice and to be heard. And, like after 2 months in critical care, I wanted her off the ventilator because she'd been breathing at that point longer on that artificial machine than she'd been breathing on her own. And I said, no, she can't do it. So I had to really dig for the strength to trust my intuition as the seconds counted down after they grudgingly did agree to pull the ventilator, and she wasn't breathing. And then they called times up and they all rushed to get ready to reintubate. And I don't know where it came from, but I just said, wait, just give her 5 more seconds. And my heart is pounding and I'm questioning myself. And, time seems to freeze. And then like a bad movie, one of those B movies, the nurse starts counting down, 5. And I'm just like, come on, Jade, please. 4, you can do it. Jade, you're stronger than you think. 3, take my strength if you want to. And finally at 1, she takes in that first breath on her own in months. And, And then they called us in when she was approaching 5 months old, still not even back to her birth weight, and told us that we were end of the line. She wasn't responding, which was true. And they said they need to go in and operate again. And I was like, no, she will not survive. She is not strong enough. And the one cardiologist, I still remember it like yesterday, he's like, fine, if you won't give us permission to operate, but we don't think she'll make it, and it'll be on your head. Like, can you imagine? So, and then they knew they'd stepped in, they bring the chief cardiologist down, and he's like, Mom, I understand you don't think we're doing everything that we can. What should we do? And we had a conversation. And again, because of that R-FIT that I had been employing without even thinking about it, that model of rapport building, relationship building, I had built that relationship. We were able to have that discussion, and they did everything that I asked, and it worked. And we were able to bring Jade home. They had said she wasn't going to survive. Within a week after that conversation, we were on our way home. And against all odds and predictions, just so you know, there is a happy ending. Jade is now 26 and has never needed any further surgery or heart medication, despite all of the predictions. So yes, thank you. So for those of you who already tap into your feminine, you use these skills in a myriad of ways every day. And you probably haven't thought of it in negotiation for most of those. And for those of you who are more likely to tap into your masculine, which is okay, I certainly did, you have all of these skills. It's just about starting to use them with intention. And that's what I really want to focus on today, to have you sort of be able to think about and come away with, because you've likely been conditioned to see a lot of your secret weapons as a liability instead of your greatest strength. So I invite you to flip that perception. It is easier than you would think to incorporate these elements to elevate your influence and your persuasive abilities, both at that micro and macro level. And the irony, because it's been resisted for so long, is that studies confirm people who show up and invoke these so-called feminine skills get better outcomes, more creative solutions, better buy-in, less conflict, longer lasting agreements, better relationships, and more positive impact. I mean, imagine the power of those results on the global scene. I mean, you guys are all about peace. Imagine getting more creative outcomes, better buy-in, longer lasting agreements, better relationships, and more positive impact on the global scale simply by leaning in to some of these so-called feminine skills and making that our new model, recognizing the strength and the power of that. So I wanted to make sure today, so you get some new content as well, to share another model from my Art of Feminine Negotiation system. And we're only going to have time to just sort of introduce the concept. We won't be able to really dig in and explore it, but I wanted to give you at least a taste of the concept so you can see its value. I call it the no fear model. You can tell I love acronyms. So no fear, 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 ego, attachment, and reactivity. Now, most conflict arises from a sense of powerlessness. And again, think of the conflict you've seen in your life, whether in your personal life, in your professional life, on the global scene. It almost always initiates with a sense of powerlessness from one or both parties or multiple parties. And much like our misguided concepts of success, I'd suggest that our conditioning around power contributes to today's problems. We seek to exert power over people rather than having power with people. And, that desire to control often comes from a place of fear. And that's what got me to thinking about this no fear model. So I advocate, as part of your preparation for any negotiation, whether personal, professional, or global, do a quick check-in on what I call the no fear scale. So as I go through each item here quickly now, I invite you, think about a difficult conversation that you have coming up and consider how this check-in could help you get better outcomes. So fear, the F, right? What fears might be driving me? And I ask myself this every time going in. I invite you to think about it. What fears might be driving me or might show up for me in this negotiation? Is it a fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of missing out, fear of the unknown, fear of success, which we don't even talk about often? That often can hold us back or change how we show up. Fear of being judged, the list goes on. So really tap into that and consider, how can I use my awareness of these fears that are going to show up for me to actually fuel me to show up as a better version of myself? And here's the key, then also consider what fears are likely to be driving the other party. And how can I use that information to show up better and to get those better outcomes? And then the E is ego. So consider, how does ego show up for me? How is that ego likely to show up for me in this negotiation? And how can I keep my ego out of it so I don't make this about me? See, in that win-lose competitive model, we make it all about us. What do I want? What do I need? We talk too long. We talk too much. I invite you, take your ego out of it. Don't make any negotiation about you, but instead about them. It is a game changer. If you find that you're experiencing a need to win, if you find that you're talking too much, if you resist admitting that you don't know something, these are all signs that ego is in the house. And even a need to be liked, which as women, we could be very guilty of, right? We've been conditioned to be people pleasers. We don't see that as ego, but needing to be liked is actually another sign that ego's in the house. So consider how ego might show up for you and how you can, every time you catch it, flip it to turn your attention to the other party, get curious. And as always, consider how might ego show up for the other party? And how can I use that to get a better outcome? How can I have, maybe I play to their ego. I allow them to be fully seen and heard and to feel like they matter. I get curious. I allow them to talk more. I listen. I reflect back what they're saying. Even when I disagree, I at least reflect back what they're saying in the most great. I make their argument better than they did. I call that elevated active listening. It is a powerful way to trigger reciprocity when you can take your ego out of it and allow the other person to have that ego and have things be their ideas. Attachment. What might I be too attached to? How can I stay flexible so I don't miss out on opportunities that might be right there for even better outcomes than the idea that I am attached to? And again, what might the other party be too attached to coming in here? And how can I plan in advance to move the dial on that by better understanding it? And the R, finally, reactivity. What are my triggers? Things that might cause me to be reactive, and how can I address it? Be prepared so that you can quickly ground yourself and stay focused on the objective, not on your reactivity or your ego. And consider in advance what triggers might cause reactivity in the other party. How can I avoid it? What language maybe should I avoid? What framing of issues should I avoid? How can I allow them to be seen and heard and feel like they matter to avoid reactivity, making our conversation, our negotiations go sideways? And just by way of illustration, let me I invite you to think of a simple conversation with your teenage kids. Imagine the power of that simple preparation check-in. And I'm going to share a personal example so you can see how this applies in our personal life and then extrapolate that. Because I find throwing these acronyms and sort of teaching at you, usually a story can help frame it better. So and I'm being very vulnerable and transparent here. My son was diagnosed with a very serious mental health issue early in COVID, and he was hospitalized for a period of time. And I am stressed to the max, as you can imagine. Access is an issue during COVID, even getting visiting. Everything seemed to be a negotiation constantly. Resources were an issue as everything is shut down. I'm terrified about what this means for my son, for his future, for my hopes and dreams for him as a mother. I was grieving, frankly, and he's blaming us for being there in the hospital. He is angry. And of course, I'm defensive, trying to explain, just wanting him to understand, right? This isn't us. This is really for you, for the best. So we're butting heads. I mean, how often have you seen that happen? Maybe in not such dramatic circumstances, maybe more dramatic circumstances. And I finally realized, oh my gosh, I need to practice what I preach. I'm not doing what I teach here on the art of negotiation. So I thought, okay, face my fear, all those ugly fears. My gosh, there were a lot of them. Let me tell you, it was a terrifying experience. Face my ego, face where attachment was showing up to me, face my reactivity, and let it go. Let go of my fear, let go of my ego, let go of my attachment and my reactivity, and make this about him. Put myself fully in his shoes. I brought my R-Fit model with intention, showing up for that next visit. I was like, how am I going to build rapport? How am I going to bring empathy to the table? How can I build that trust my intuition, right? How can I be more flexible when I show up there? And I brought my no fear model, and I allowed myself, imagine his fear, his ego, his entire sense of self shattered in this moment, his attachment to his old life that he sees as disappearing, his reactivity, understandable. And I showed up from a total place of curiosity and empathy. And I owned it. I'm like, I am so sorry, Chase. I have been making this about me. And I own that. I can't even begin to pretend I can imagine what this is being like for you, what this experience has been like for you. But I am here today and I want to hear. And at first there was resistance because that trust wasn't there. But the more I allowed myself, no matter what he threw at me, to just stay grounded and stay coming from a place of curiosity for him, giving up my fear, my ego, my attachment, my reactivity, coming from empathy, I literally saw a physical softening of him in that space. And it opened the space for us to find solutions, to understand, and frankly, to heal, to begin to heal. It was such a powerful shift. So I share that to invite you to think about how you might apply this in your personal life, but also in your professional life. When you're dealing with those bullies, when you're dealing with people who have big egos or big personalities, how you might use this simple sort of model to get those better outcomes, how we might use this to apply to global conflicts, frankly. Look below the surface to the unstated needs in any conflict. Think about Russia and, Putin. Think, fear, is there some of that there? Ego, attachment, and reactivity? Yes, in spades. And it's easy to just say they're crazy. We so often do that. We look through history when we say, but get curious. And I hope you're beginning to see the power of these simple models and shifts. And not to overwhelm you, but before I want to make sure before I leave today that I at least touch on the third model in my sort of trilogy framework, if you will, for the art of feminine negotiation. Again, just a little tease, a little flavor, but enough, I hope, that you can take these models away with you and use them practically to get some better outcomes. And that the more we talk about this and model it, the more we can start to shift the world to those feminine energies, tip that balance, get the world back in balance. So the 5 W's is my third model. I don't know if that counts as an acronym or not. The 5 W's, it's for who, what, where, when, and why. Really simple to remember, right? 5 W's, we use them tons of times in different contexts. And it's interesting to me, even most negotiation books I've read and the experts, I have yet to come across a single expert who talks about these 5 W's, as a context, as a model in negotiation. And for me, it is the most powerful game changer. Just think who. And I'm just going to, like I say, touch on them, give you a teaser of things to think about. Who are you? And by that, I mean, consider with intention, what role are you showing up as in this negotiation? Now, I'm not talking about role play. I'm talking about, I've had many a conversation when I'm in mom mode. Have you ever had that? And then the kids' eyes glaze over, you've lost them right out of the gate because I'm in mom mode. At work, are you coming in as the boss, for example, when coming in as a concerned team member might be a better approach? You get really intentional about the role. Who are you showing up as? Who do you want to show up as? One tip, if you take nothing else away, this can change so much for you. Pick 3 words that define who you want to show up as in any discussion, in any negotiation, personal, professional, global. Be very intentional. So, and there's no right or wrong answer so long as you're intentional. So maybe it's calm, collected, compelling. Think about the power of that. If you choose those 3 words going into a conversation that you anticipate is going to be really difficult, because then if you get triggered, you can take a moment, just take a breath and ground yourself. I'm going to show up calm, compelling, and collected, right? You ground yourself in those 3 words. Decide who you want to show up as. And also, who will the other side expect you, the other party expect you to show up as? It could be a powerful shift in a negotiation when you show up differently. If when they expected me to be the barracuda and I showed up coming from a place of compassion, there was a profound shift that took place in those negotiations. So consider, who are you negotiating with? Who should you be negotiating with? Who will be impacted by your negotiations? We so often forget that. And then on the what, most people focus on the substantive. I know what I want, right? I invite you to think of at least 3 outcomes. Your substantive outcomes, absolutely. Get clarity about that, but also be flexible. But your process outcomes often get forgotten. Sometimes negotiating the process can be more important than the what you're negotiating about. Like if you're in sales, for example, negotiating a process for how pricing will be determined may mean you lose on this particular sale, but down the road, you're going to gain exponentially. So think about negotiating a process that makes sense. And the third and most often forgotten is be intentional about what your relationship outcome is that you're seeking. Sometimes losing the what of any particular negotiation is worth it because of the relationship extra strength that you get, negotiating with your kid again, by way of example. And I'll give an example. My middle guy, when the kids wanted cell phones and we were like, no, you're not getting cell phones. And this particular, my middle guy, he was dyslexic and he had processing issues. And he wrote me this letter, like, oh my gosh, it was funny and witty and spelling errors and stuff all, but he made this argument, like he put on sort of his legal hat. It was so clever. And I spoke to my husband, I'm like, you know what? His sense of confidence and the relationship outcomes of this are way more important than digging in on not having a phone, right? So consider your relationship outcomes. And then we've got the where, in real estate, location, location, location. We know how important it is. Any good book you've ever read, any novel, the setting, authors spend inordinate time on their setting because we know it's important. And yet we forget this in our negotiations, with your intimate partner, whether you negotiate in the bedroom or the dining room might have a profound impact on the outcome of that negotiation, right? At work, is this a water cooler conversation, a boardroom conversation, or should this happen on a firm retreat? You get the idea. Consider the where with intention, and tied to that, the when. As kids, we intuitively knew not to ask our parents for something when they were in a crappy mood, right? We knew that timing was important. And as adults, we forget that lesson, right? I mean, kids are actually incredibly effective negotiators. We can learn, I do a whole other thing on learning great negotiation skills from our kids. But consider the timing of your negotiations. If you're looking for a big promotion or an increase, doing that when you've just had the worst quarter ever, probably not the best timing. Having an important conversation with your spouse when they're in the, last quarter of the Super Bowl, probably not the best timing, right? So consider your when with intention. And finally, your why. Right. And people say, well, yeah, I can see that applies for some things, but, not if it's just about money. It's never just about the money, right? It's about what that money represents for each of the parties. So know your deep why going into a negotiation, and always consider the deep why of the other party. What's driving them, right? What is driving? What is the deep why in the conflict in the Middle East? What is the deep why driving the conflict in Russia and Ukraine today? Imagine what a game changer to apply this simple 5W method to all of your negotiations, kids, intimate partners, friends, employees, and at the macro level. Now, we have just scratched the surface of my Art of Feminine negotiation system. We've talked about the R-FIT model, how you can be intentional about bringing rapport and empathy and flexibility and intuition and trust to the table. We have talked about the no fear model, when you consider both your fears, ego, attachment, and reactivity, as well as the other parties. We've talked about my 5W, which again, the more you practice this and make it a part of your everyday, it gets faster and faster. It'll become second nature to you to go through these checklists. And I really hope you can see the value and can see why I was so excited to speak with you in particular today, like peace, personally, professionally, globally. The potential is right here, right in the palm of our hands, with some simple shifts, some really simple reframes with profound potential impact. The world is out of balance now, but people are open to that new way of being. The feminine voice is being diminished. That imbalance has led to chaos. And now we are open to recognizing the value of the feminine. So I invite you to close your eyes and imagine a world where we all start to negotiate and frame negotiation from a place of powerful feminine persuasion, where we're looking to build stronger relationships, not coming from a place of competition, not looking to just have our needs met, but also to understand and meet the needs of others, valuing and respecting our differences. I'm going to say that again, respect our differences and step into the best of our humanity. And the gift of that approach is not only will it amplify your success, and it will, but it will also pave the path to get even better solutions for everybody than could be anticipated under that traditional win-lose model. Imagine the ripple effects of a world where that becomes a new model for us negotiating our lives, right? The ripple effect of that kind of transformation just can't be overstated. So I'm sure you can tell I'm a little passionate about this subject. Manal asked me to speak to what I've got on the go now. I've created Art of Feminine Negotiation programs, or persuasion programs, as I like to call them. I've got an Art of Feminine Negotiation podcast that airs weekly. And my new book, which I'm super excited about, is finally out. And it's called The Art of Feminine Negotiation: How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom. Maybe you want to consider it for your Ollin book, one of your Ollin book clubs. And I do offer training, both personal or corporate. And I'll put a little link in the chat if anybody's interested. There's no sales, no pitch here at all. But I did want to open some spots. If anyone is interested in exploring this concept further for negotiating your best life, whether personally or at the corporate level, I am happy to have a one-on-one call and maybe you have push the epiphany for you a little further about areas in your life where you could benefit from this. So, and the link for that, if you want to break your session, is just tiny URL, that's url.com/WOP for Women on Purpose, and then the word purpose. So WO purpose with the WOP capitalized. And I guess I'll just end and then open the floor for questions. I call on you, as I often do when I speak, I call on you to be the change, to shift the world out of fear that we're seeing today, shift the world out of the uncertainty that we're seeing today, and help shift to powerful resilience and possibility through a concept as simple as the art of feminine negotiation, because we all deserve that. So that's my my chat here. I'm just posting that link in the chat for you guys, and I am wide open to questions, so please feel free.
All right, great job. I think I just stopped our recording. Did you guys hear it? Or no, did it say recording has stopped? I didn't hear it, but I think I clicked on stop recording. So Cindy, excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. You can see your passion, you can see the experience, the depth of your experience, and you just sharing, just your vulnerability with us and those, intimate stories. So thank you for allowing us to, kind of get a glimpse of, truly what you're sharing with us. I would love to open it up for any questions, things that you've taken away, if there's clarification that you need with the RFIT and then the fear and the 5 W's. I love it because acronyms do help you in terms of remembering. Yeah. So anyone that's having a difficult conversation or, needing to use some of the skill set, I would love to hear from you guys before we let Cindy go.
Yeah, and just while we're waiting for that, I will speak on that vulnerability piece. I'm really intentional about sharing some of that stuff, much to the chagrin of my children, as you can imagine. But I think that's one of the things, again, that we've been so conditioned to see that vulnerability as a weakness. And I confess, growing up, I was like, my dad was like, you just don't show weakness, right? As much as he, taught us to treat everyone. And I really invite people to reshift that. I think when you can show up fully authentically and be